Hey there, I'm Julie Summers, and I'm a 52-year-old social worker. I want to share something pretty intense with you, my near-death experience and what I went through when Jesus showed me 6 shocking events that are supposed to happen in 2025. But before we dive in, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. It'd be great to feel a bit closer, even if we're miles apart. And don't forget to like and drop a comment about what you think of my testimony. Let's keep it real and have a good chat so we can learn from one another. Enjoy listening. So, this all started on March 20th, 2021, when I clinically died for 21 minutes and 11 seconds. It all kicked off when I collapsed at work one morning. My heart just gave out, thanks to years of stress and health issues I had been ignoring. The last thing I remember is my coworkers frantically calling 911. And then everything went dark. Next thing I knew, I was floating outside my body, watching the medical team try to bring me back. I felt this overwhelming peace wash over me, realizing I wasn't part of the world I knew anymore. As I floated in this weird space, I felt completely surrounded by love. And then I felt him, Jesus. He appeared in a way that's hard to put into words. His presence was pure light, not blinding, but warm and inviting, like a cozy hug on a chilly day. His eyes were full of compassion and understanding, and it felt like he could see every part of me, every hurt, regret, and joy I had ever experienced. But despite knowing all that, he looked at me with a love so deep that it overwhelmed me. "Julie," he said, "you're not done yet. I have something to show you." I was taken aback. I'd never heard his voice sound so personal and direct. But before I could wrap my head around it, everything around me shifted. The peaceful vibe changed, and suddenly I was in this massive amphitheater of light that felt alive. I looked at Jesus, and he had this excited look on his face. "I'm going to show you what's coming in 2025, he said. "You're part of something bigger, and I want you to see what's ahead." Then he said something that changed everything. "First, I will show you the great deception." As soon as he said that, I felt this heavy dread fill the air. It was like reality itself was shifting. The first scene he showed me was all about the deception that's been spreading around the world, how lies and false teachings have crept into every corner of society, even into the church. I saw how people were being led astray by false prophets and teachings, pretending to be from God, but were totally off track. It wasn't just happening far away, it was everywhere. I watched as normal people were drawn in by promises of peace, enlightenment, and unity, but they were actually moving further away from the truth of Jesus Christ. The scariest part was seeing how these lies gained power and influence, convincing millions that they were walking in truth when, in reality, they were in darkness. "Many will be deceived in the last days," Jesus told me. "It'll start off subtle, but will grow. Those not rooted in my word will get swept away." I saw people embracing New Age ideas, thinking all paths led to God. Spiritual movements promoting self-enlightenment and humanism over the divine truths in Scripture were everywhere. It felt like a huge cloud of confusion had settled over the world, and the more people searched for answers, the more lost they became. But just when I thought I wouldn't be able to handle the heaviness, Jesus said, "Watch." Suddenly, the atmosphere changed again, and what appeared in front of me was this brilliant light that made the surrounding darkness seem tiny. It felt like the very essence of existence was glowing from within, and from this light, I saw people starting to rise. I realized then that the deception wouldn't have the final say. There was a remnant, those who had held on to the truth of Jesus Christ, who were about to experience an outpouring of His Spirit like nothing the world had ever seen before. This was the Great Awakening. "Where darkness increases, my light shines even brighter," Jesus said. The first scene of this awakening showed me a young software engineer in a high-tech office in Silicon Valley. He was surrounded by screens and complicated code, deep in thought, when suddenly he stopped. Tears started streaming down his face. He didn't know why, but at that moment, he realized that what he was working on, AI meant to replace human spirituality, was wrong. Right there at his desk, he fell to his knees and began praising Jesus, not caring about his job or what anyone thought. Then Jesus looked at me, and the scene shifted again. I found myself in a university lecture hall. A professor known for her atheism was at the front, critiquing religious beliefs and mocking the idea of God. Suddenly, she stopped mid-sentence. Her hands started trembling, and her eyes widened in shock. She gripped the podium tightly, and then she said something I never could have imagined. "I've been wrong," she said, her voice shaking. "I just met Jesus Christ. Everything I taught you about religion being a delusion, I was the one who was deluded." I couldn't believe my eyes. People everywhere from all walks of life were waking up to this truth: atheists, agnostics, folks who never even thought about Christ were suddenly having these undeniable encounters with him. It wasn't just happening in classrooms or offices, it was everywhere. I saw a mosque in the Middle East packed with Muslims having visions of Jesus. I watched as tough prisoners broke down in tears, repenting as they met the living Christ. In Hollywood, executives were ditching projects that mocked faith. Government officials were openly asking for God's guidance. In hospitals, doctors and nurses were witnessing miraculous healings that no one could explain. But with all this amazing stuff, I also saw the price people were paying. Jesus looked at me, and his expression turned serious. "Watch closely," he said. I saw believers facing persecution in ways I never imagined. Families were ripped apart, kids were disowned for their faith, spouses walked away from each other, people lost their jobs, students got kicked out of school. The world was a mess, and the divide between good and evil was crystal clear. There won't be any more lukewarm faith, Jesus told me. No more casual Christianity. Everyone will have to decide where they stand. I was shown how this awakening crossed all human boundaries: age, culture, education, and social status. Everyone, rich and poor, young and old, was experiencing this divine encounter. There was no separation. This was true unity, born from the Spirit, not from compromise. "Where there's humility," Jesus said, "my Spirit will move with greater power." I saw kids and teens becoming strong witnesses for Christ. They operated with spiritual authority, unafraid of the pushback they faced. But I also saw the struggles they'd encounter: persecution in schools, on social media, and even at home. Jesus spoke to me again, his voice full of compassion. "The young ones who stay faithful during this time will receive special grace," he said. "They'll face unique challenges, but they'll also walk in unique authority." Then the scene shifted to underground church gatherings in places where persecution was toughest. Despite the danger, the believers' faces were lit up with joy, supernatural joy. I realized they had found something way better than comfort. They had discovered the presence of Jesus, and that presence was way more satisfying than any earthly security. "The persecution purifies my church," Jesus said. "What the enemy means for harm, I use for greater glory." Then I saw something incredible: how this awakening would change everything. In business, Christian entrepreneurs started creating platforms that built real community. In tech, new believers in programming were making tools that connected people in faith. Artists and musicians began creating work that carried God's presence. And the entertainment industry started to shift. Even in schools, young people kicked off prayer movements that spread like wildfire. Teachers began to share their faith boldly. no matter the restrictions. It was clear this awakening wouldn't look like anything we expected. It wouldn't be about building bigger churches or creating Christian celebrities. It was going to be all about humility, brokenness, and genuine unity among believers. True unity, Jesus explained, isn't the fake unity offered by deceivers. This is the unity of my spirit, born of truth. But as with everything, there was more to come. Jesus then revealed the third event that would follow, the Great Shaking. The atmosphere around me got heavy. I felt the ground shake, not from an earthquake, but from a spiritual unease, a shaking that was about to rock the world's foundations in ways no one could see coming. I watched nations start to crumble due to political instability, financial crises, and natural disasters. But this wasn't just an external shaking, it was also spiritual. The world's values, priorities, and trust in its systems were about to be put to the test. I saw governments making decisions that affected millions, decisions that seemed to promise peace but would only lead to more chaos. The rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. The gap between them was widening alarmingly. The false peace world leaders were promising was just temporary, and deep down, everyone knew it. Then the shaking got personal. I saw families being torn apart by differences in values and beliefs, struggling to understand the truth. People who used to stand together in their communities were now at odds, not just with each other, but with the very institutions they once trusted. What shocked me most was that this shaking didn't just hit those who didn't know Christ. Even believers were caught in the tremor. Jesus spoke to me during this vision. The world is about to experience a spiritual shaking that will test everyone's heart. Those who have built their lives on anything other than me will find themselves unsteady. I felt the tension building around me, and I saw it mirrored in the hearts of those nearby. Many were scrambling for answers, desperately trying to hold on to anything that would give them stability. Yet, the more they grasped, the more it slipped away. I saw families fighting, churches splitting, and people questioning their beliefs. There will be great deception during this time, Jesus continued. Many will be led astray by false promises of security and comfort. Only those who seek the truth in me will stand firm. I watched as people tried to make sense of the chaos, some turning to false ideologies, others relying on their own understanding of the world. In the middle of this shaking, many lost their faith altogether, unable to reconcile the suffering they saw with their beliefs about a loving God. The pressure was intense, and it broke some, but there was still hope. As the shaking reached its peak, I saw a new movement starting to rise. It was a movement of the heart, a group of people who refused to be swayed by the chaos around them. They were those who held on to their faith, those who built their lives on the solid ground of Christ. These individuals were strengthened by the shaking, not weakened. Their roots ran deep, and though they faced trials, they stood firm. Jesus looked at me as the vision of the great shaking faded. "It's in the shaking that my people are refined," he said. "They will endure, and through their endurance, they will shine." Finally, the fourth event he showed me that's coming in 2025 is the Great Harvest. I found myself in this huge field that seemed to go on forever. It was filled with golden grain, just waiting to be harvested. It was a breathtaking sight, but there was a sense of urgency in the air. Jesus was there with me, looking out at the field with a longing in his eyes. "The harvest is ready," he said, "but there aren't enough workers." As he spoke, I saw people from all walks of life, different cultures, backgrounds, and nations, coming together to gather the harvest. They weren't the powerful or influential. They were just ordinary folks, the humble ones who had stayed faithful to him through tough times. These were the workers who would bring in the harvest. This harvest wasn't just about saving souls, even though that was a big part of it. It was about a global movement of spiritual awakening, a revival spreading across nations, even reaching the most remote corners of the earth. I saw missionaries heading into countries where Christianity was banned, sharing the gospel with people who had never heard of Jesus before. And those people responded with pure joy, as if they had been waiting for this moment their whole lives. This is the great harvest, Jesus said. Before the end, there will be a revival when millions, even billions, will discover the truth of my love. But this harvest wouldn't come easy. I saw churches stepping up to lead the way, but there was also persecution looming. Governments would crack down on religious freedom, and those preaching the gospel would face arrest, imprisonment, and even death. Yet, despite the challenges, the gospel would spread like wildfire. The great harvest will bring great joy, Jesus said, but it'll also come at a cost. Those who stay faithful will endure and be rewarded. Then, just like that, he took me to the next event, the Great Sifting. Here, I saw a huge separation happening, like wheat being separated from chaff by fire. This process started with the Great Shaking and flowed into the Great Harvest. As people responded to the gospel, they faced a choice, to stand firm or to fall away. The sifting was a time of testing, revealing who the true followers of Christ were. I saw people who had once been part of the church, who had claimed faith in Christ, falling away. They were swept up by deception, their hearts hardened by the pressures of the world. Some turned to false beliefs, others to self-worship, and some to hopelessness. The sifting wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Not everyone who calls on my name will enter the kingdom, Jesus said. The sifting will show who has truly followed me, who has stayed faithful to the end. But there was also joy in the sifting. I saw those who remained faithful being refined by the fire, their hearts purified, their faith strengthened. It was like they had become even more beautiful through their trials. Their love for Christ burned brighter, and their determination to endure grew stronger. The sifting is necessary, Jesus said. It's through the fire that my people are made pure. Finally, the sixth event he showed me was the rise of the Antichrist. In an instant, I saw this charismatic leader emerging, someone who would gain power during a global crisis. This leader could unite nations, promising a false peace that would mislead the masses. He was a master manipulator, convincing people he had all the answers, everything the world had been searching for, a savior who promised unity and prosperity. But behind that facade was darkness. I saw this leader standing in front of a massive crowd, his eyes glowing with an eerie intensity. The people cheered, believing he was their Messiah. They worshipped him, not realizing they were actually worshiping the Antichrist. Jesus looked at me as I watched this unfold. Many will follow him, he said, but you, my people, must not be deceived. He's a counterfeit. He'll bring destruction, not salvation. I saw people who once had faith turning to this leader, thinking he had the answers, but those who stayed true to Christ knew the truth. They recognized the deception. Even as the Antichrist gained power, they stood firm, proclaiming the truth of Jesus. The rise of the Antichrist will be one of the greatest tests of faith, Jesus said, but my people won't be swayed. They will endure. In that moment, I realized that everything I had experienced, the great deception, the shaking, the awakening, the harvest, the sifting, and the rise of the Antichrist, had led to this moment. Jesus was coming back, and nothing could stop his victory. As I stood there with him, everything he showed me started to sink in. The challenges for the world in 2025 would be huge, but I knew that the hope and strength of those who stayed faithful to Christ would be rock solid. Then, suddenly, I felt myself being pulled back to my body. The peace I had felt in his presence lingered, now mixed with a deep sense of purpose. Jesus had shown me the way forward and reminded me that I wasn't alone. In a rush, I was back in the hospital room, the sterile air and smells hitting me hard. My heart, once still, started beating again. The medical team gasped in shock as my vital signs returned to normal. When I opened my eyes, I saw the worried faces of my colleagues and paramedics. But beneath their confusion was something new in me, something eternal. I had witnessed the future, the great deception, the awakening, the rise of the Antichrist. It was all real, and I had to share this message. The urgency to awaken others to the truth was crystal clear. Jesus had entrusted me with this vision, and I couldn't ignore it. Where darkness increases, my light shines even brighter. His words echoed in my heart every day. I knew that despite the trials ahead, the light of Christ would guide us all through the storm. The Great Awakening was coming, and though many would be deceived, I wanted to stand strong with those who wouldn't be swayed by the lies. Looking ahead, I hold on to one truth. Faith is about standing firm when everything seems to fall apart. Jesus has already won, and nothing, not the deception, the shaking, or the rise of the Antichrist, can change that. I hope that my near-death experience inspires you to seek the truth, cling to the light, and share this hope with others. The time is short, and the harvest is near. Let's answer the call to work. We're not alone. His light is shining brighter than ever, and together we will endure.